I'm going to give a brief overview of PostgreSQL and PostGIS. I'll quickly just run through a couple slides I have here, and then I'll do a demonstration. I'll show how you would install Postgres and PostGIS. Then I'll do a few simple queries with Postgres, a few spatial queries with PostGIS. What is PostGIS? It's an extension for PostgreSQL. It adds spatial functions and GIS support to your databases. It's similar to other spatial database management systems like Oracle, Spatialite, ArcSD, but it's free. It contains spatial operators that you can use to determine geospatial properties about your data and perform geospatial operations on the data. It can be used with other software. QGIS, for example, there's really good integration between PostGIS and QGIS. PostGIS geometry. So what PostGIS does is it adds a new data type. So in addition to having a number or text fields, you can have data with a spatial component. And PostGIS adds spatial functions that use the geometries to perform operations. And it has a number of different types of operations. You can create new data, you can modify data, and you can return results about the data, so you can find true or false results. And it supports a number of different types of data, of geometric data, that is, points, lines, polygons, and multi-point, multi-line, and multi-polygon. And geoprocessing, there are over 1,000 PostGIS functions. It can do pretty well anything that you could do with any other GIS software. I have buffer, touch, within, overlap. Now I'm just going to quickly go through how you might install PostGIS, and there are a few different ways to do it. I'm just on the PostGIS install page, and I'll direct you to these two links here, the Big SQL and the Enterprise DB. These would be the main two ways that you would install Postgres on your system. So I just have them here. This is the Enterprise DB, and this is the Big SQL. And I have just downloaded this here, the 10.4 executable file. So I'll just run through that quickly. Okay. So here I have the installation directory, which you can obviously set wherever you want, but it's important to note where exactly you are setting this to install, because you will find that you need to use this path at various times when you're using Postgres. So it's maybe a good idea to put it somewhere that you'll remember, somewhere that has a simple path name like C/PostgreSQL. And I'm going to check to install pgadmin3, and that is a graphical user interface for managing your Postgres databases. And now it's asking me for a password, so my super user, which is essentially my administrative user, 3, like that. Okay, and now it's installing. And now I've just skipped ahead here, so now it's installed. So now I'm going to install the actual PostGIS package for Postgres, and you can get that actually directly from the PostGIS website. And I'm not going to create a spatial database right now, just install PostGIS, and you'll notice that the destination folder here is not where Postgres was installed to. So remember, I installed it to PostgreSQL like that. And now if I go to C, where I installed it, PostgreSQL, and then pg10, this is actually the correct path. Now I'm just going to create a database in my PostgreSQL. There are two different ways to do this. You can do this the old-fashioned way through the command line, or you can do it with the pgadmin program that was installed with the Postgres. First, I'll just quickly show the command line way. So if you go to your Postgres file in your start menu and open up psql shell, so this is your command line for Postgres. So I can just say create database test using SQL syntax. If I run that, there it just created that database. The other way I can create databases is if I go into my Postgres folder and open up the pgadmin3. This is the interface here, and in server groups I can connect to a server, so Postgres 10.4 and localhost, and then set my password that I gave before. And now Postgres 10.4 is available. Now I clicked on that, and if I go into the databases here, you can see that that test database that I just created with the PSQL shell is already available. To create a new database in pgadmin, it's also pretty easy. You just right click on database and press new database, and I'll call that test2. The owner, I can just leave it blank. If I leave it blank, it just defaults to the super user Postgres. I'll just press OK. And now I have my test2. If I just go quickly back to my pgsql and I do \L, you'll see it will list all the databases I have. So, and now you can see it has test and test2. Now let's suppose I want to add the PostGIS functions to my test database. So if I just go into here, I can see I only have the one extension. And if I look in my schemas, it has 0 functions in it right now. What I can do is, well, there are two ways to do it. I can open up my PSQL shell, and I will connect to my test database, and I will say create extension PostGIS. So if I press the refresh button in here, look, now we have 2 extensions, and now look at all these functions. So over 1,000, and they're all very GIS looking, right? So, and now the other way I could create the extension, let's say I go into my test2 database, so I can actually do it directly through pgadmin. I'll go into my SQL window and make sure that the database you want to work with is selected. So test2 is highlighted, and this query is for test2. So if I had test highlighted, this is a query for test. So I will do the exact same thing. PostGIS, and run it with the run tool, and now it's done. I'll close this query, and again I will refresh, and now we have both extensions and all of these functions here. You also notice, by the way, that there is a table. You can actually right click on it and press view data. You can actually have a look at what's in this table, and what it is all of your projections. So if you bring in a spatial layer into your PostGIS, these are all the different projections that it can have. So what I can do now is bring in some spatial layers like shapefiles into these databases. And there are a few different ways to do this. As before, there's a command line way, the old-fashioned way, and there's, well, there are a couple of different graphical ways you can do this. So first I'll just quickly go through the command line way. So if I open my command prompt, there is a command called shape to pgsql, and what that does is it takes shape files and it imports them into databases as SQL files. And this shape to pgsql is actually, if you go into your PostgreSQL folder and into your bin, which is where all of your executables and libraries are stored, you can find it here, your shape to pgsql, and that would have been installed when you installed the PostGIS extension. So the format for this command is like so. So I to create the index, S, this is to add in the SRID, spatial reference identifier. Then I need the path to the shapefile I want to import. So I just have a few, on my desktop I have a few shapefiles in here. And let's say I want to input this roads layer. So I just get the full path. And then roads.shp. And I have this path in quotation marks, and the reason I have those is because there's a space in this path. If there's no space, I wouldn't need those. Pipe PSQL user postgrace, and then the database name, which is test. Okay, and now it's inserting that layer into my test database. Okay, now it's done. If I actually go back to my pgadmin and let's close the functions, there's one table. Now if I highlight this and refresh, there are two tables, and there's my roads layer. And it will have all of the columns from that shapefile, but it also created a geom column, which is important for PostGIS. You need that. I'll just note quickly that there are a couple of other optional parameters you can set for your Shape2PG SQL. If I just type in Shape2PG SQL like that, it'll actually give me a list of all of them. So you remember I typed in -S, -I, -D. For example, when I typed in D before my database name, what it did is drop any tables with that name, roads, and then creates a table and populates it with the shapefile I imported. If I typed A database instead of D database, it would have appended that shapefile into a table with that name, but it would have to be identical in terms of the different columns that it had and the different data types that those columns had. And P only creates a table. It doesn't populate it with any of the data. And there are just a couple other things here that are explained. So K, you might want to put your -K in your command because it keeps the identifier's case. So by default it sets all of your column names to lowercase. So if you put in a -K, it will keep them uppercase or lowercase. So the second way I'll show, it's a little bit easier for some people, is I can go down to the PostGIS bundle for Postgres and open up the shapefile and DBF loader exporter. And this would have been installed when you installed your PostGIS. So first thing you need to do is connect. So I'll enter in my super user password and then give a name for the database. So this time I'll do test2. Okay, and now it says here that the connection succeeded. So we are connected to that database, and we can load shapefiles directly into test2 with this interface. So what I do is I go to add file, and I'll navigate back to my layers, and maybe this time I will load up my SUMS. Okay, and I can set the name for what I want to call it. So if I don't want to call it SUMS Alligat UTM, I could change it just to, maybe I just want to call it SUMS. And I have to set the SRID manually again. You have to set the SRID manually for this particular tool and for the Shape2PG SQL, so it's a bit inconvenient if you have a lot of layers. And if you press this RM button, that will just remove it. And you can add more if you want. But I'm just going to stick with this one for now. And I'll just press import. And now it's done. If I go back to my test2, now I have two tables. So the last way I'm going to show you how to import, which is actually probably the best way, is through QGIS. So I will just add a layer. In the browser panel for QGIS, we have the ability to connect to PostGIS. All I need to do is create a new connection. So I can call the connection whatever I want. I'll just say test connection, and I set my local host, and then I'll use the test database. So I'll just test connection. And it was successful. So now, if I open this up, I have my test connection, and I already have my roads layer in there. And I can bring in the roads layer, and it'll act the same as any other shapefile layer. I can edit it, I can export it, do whatever I would do with any other layer in QGIS. But if I want to bring layers into the database with QGIS, I have to use this, the DB Manager. It's a plugin, and it's with newer versions of QGIS, it's already installed, but if it's not, then you can just get it from your plugins. If you go to Manage and Install Plugins and install it, but I already have it installed, so I'll just open up DB Manager. If I go to my test connection, and I'll just double click on the test connection, it'll connect like that, so I'll see the rows layer I brought in, and I can, here we have an import and export, so I'll just import, and I will say I will import the rivers. I could also just browse to a shapefile that's not in my browser already, and then I can give it a new name. I'll just call it rivers, and I have a few other things I can set here, like primary key or which column is the geom. What's nice about doing this through QGIS is that it automatically sets the SRID from what the original shapefile has, so you don't have to enter it in every time you import a new layer. So I'll just press OK. Import was successful. Now it's in here. And I'll just quickly go through how you would export a shapefile that's in a database to a shapefile. It's essentially the same thing, so instead of going to import, I would just press export, select it, export, and I would just save it as a shapefile wherever I want to save it. I won't go through it, but and the same thing with the shapefile loader. I can just go to export. I have to connect, and I just go into my tables, and I can select all of these tables that I already have loaded in the database, and I can just press export. Now I'll just quickly go through how you do that with the command line. So, and there's a command similar to shape to PGSQL called pgsql to shape. So it's almost the same command. You just need to input file name, and I'll just put it on my desktop. Let's say rivers. Then the user, then the database, and then public dot the name of the layer you want to output. There. And now if I go to the desktop, there is my rivers layer.